I never thought working part-time on an ice cream truck would lead to anything more than sticky hands and a few extra bucks in my pocket. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and with tuition fees piling up, I couldn't afford to. Be picky. On my first day, the driver, a gruff guy named Ray, handed me a clipboard with a list of regular customers. At first glance, it seemed straightforward. Names, addresses, and little notes about their favorite flavors. But then I noticed something strange. Scattered throughout the list were names marked with a red X. When I asked Ray about them, his expression hardened. "Don't sell to anyone with an X," he said sharply, like it was some kind of unbreakable rule. I wanted to press him for more details, but the look in his eyes told me not to push my luck. So I nodded, tucked the clipboard under my arm, and tried to focus on scooping cones instead of the unease creeping into my chest. As the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The customers on the list were friendly enough, always waving or chatting as they handed over crumpled bills for their treats. But the ones with the red X, they never showed up, not once. It gnawed at me, this mix of curiosity and dread, until I finally decided to dig deeper. Late one night, after my shift ended, I sat down at my laptop and started searching for the names on the list. What I found made my blood run cold. Every single person marked with an X had vanished without a trace in the past few months. Missing persons reports, worried posts from family members on social media. It was all there, staring back at me like a twisted puzzle I didn't want to solve. My mind raced with questions. Who were these people? Why were they targeted? And what did Ray know that he wasn't telling me? Whatever it was, I had a sinking feeling I'd stumbled into something far bigger and far darker than selling ice cream. The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. Ray didn't seem like a criminal mastermind. He was just a middle-aged guy with grease-stained hands and a habit of humming old rock songs while driving, but there was something off about him. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The way he'd glance at me whenever I asked too many questions, or how he always seemed to know exactly where to park the truck, even in neighborhoods I'd never been to before. And then there were the disappearances themselves. How could so many people vanish without anyone noticing? It felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together until one evening, when I decided to confront him. We were parked near an empty playground, the kind of place where kids should have been laughing and running around, but instead felt eerily quiet. "What's the deal with the red X's?" I blurted out, surprising even myself. Ray froze for a moment, his hand hovering over the dashboard. Then he sighed, like he'd been expecting this conversation all along. "They're not supposed to be here," he said simply, his voice low and steady. When I pressed him for more details, he just shook his head. "It's not my job to explain. My job is to find them." His words sent chills down my spine, but they also raised more questions than answers. Find them for what? Who decided who got marked with an X, and what happened after they disappeared? Ray wouldn't say another word about it, no matter how hard I pushed. Instead, he turned up the radio and acted like the conversation had never happened. But I couldn't unhear what he'd said, or unsee the look in his eyes when he admitted the truth. This wasn't just a job, it was something else entirely, something sinister. And now, whether I wanted to admit it or not, I was part of it. After that conversation, I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time we stopped at a new neighborhood, I found myself scanning the crowd for faces that matched the names on the list. Some of them were kids, just ordinary kids who wanted a popsicle after playing outside, and the thought of them vanishing made my stomach churn. What was Ray's role in all this? Was he actively involved in whatever happened to these people? Or was he just following orders from someone higher up? The uncertainty was maddening. One afternoon, while Ray was inside a convenience store grabbing supplies, I decided to test him, or maybe sabotage him. I'm still not sure which. A boy approached the truck, his name eerily familiar. Lucas, one of the red X's. My hands trembled as I handed him a cone without saying a word. The second Ray returned and saw the kid walking away, his face turned pale with anger. "You sold to him," he hissed, gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles went white. For a moment, So I thought he might hit me, but instead he muttered something under his breath about how I'd ruined everything. We didn't stay in that neighborhood long after that. As soon as Lucas disappeared around the corner, Ray slammed the truck into gear and sped off, muttering curses under his breath. Later, when we were parked near a quiet cul-de-sac, he turned to me with an expression I'll never forget, a mix of frustration and pity. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "These people, they're not supposed to exist. Selling to them doesn't save them. It makes things worse." His words confused me even more. What did he mean by not supposed to exist? Were they part of some secret experiment, government program, or was this all just some elaborate scam targeting vulnerable communities? Whatever the truth was, Ray clearly believed what he was doing was necessary, and that scared me more than anything. The closer I got to uncovering the truth, the more dangerous things seemed to become. That night, as we drove back to the lot, where the truck was stored, I noticed something unsettling. A black SUV trailing us at a distance. At first, I thought it was just another car on the road, but when it followed us through 3 turns and even slowed down when we stopped, my heart started pounding. I glanced at Ray, hoping he'd say something, but his jaw was clenched tight, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. When we finally parked, the SUV pulled over a block away, its headlights cutting through the darkness like watchful eyes. "Who are they?" I whispered, unable to hide the tremor in my voice. Ray didn't answer immediately. Instead, he grabbed the clipboard with the list and shoved it into a hidden compartment beneath the driver's seat. "People who don't like loose ends," he said grimly, before locking the doors. For the first time since starting this job, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a creepy ice cream operation. I was caught in something far bigger and far deadlier than I could have imagined. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards in my apartment sent adrenaline coursing through me, convinced someone or something was lurking outside my window. The next morning, I went straight to the police, clutching copies of the list and screenshots of the missing persons reports I'd found online. But when I tried to explain everything, the red X's, the disappearances, the ominous warnings from Ray, the detective just raised an eyebrow. "An ice cream truck?" he repeated, skepticism dripping from his tone. Without any concrete evidence beyond a handwritten list and vague suspicions, there was nothing they could do. As I left the station, defeated, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a grave mistake. By sticking my nose where it didn't belong, I might have put myself and maybe others in even greater danger. And worst of all, I couldn't stop thinking about Lucas. What had happened to him after I gave him that cone? Had I saved him or sealed his fate? Over the next few days, paranoia consumed me. I started noticing strange things, cars idling near my apartment, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, and that same black SUV parked down the street more than once. Each time I passed by, the driver's face was obscured behind tinted windows, but I could feel their eyes on me. It didn't help that Ray had gone completely off the grid. When I showed up for my next shift, the truck was gone, along with any trace of him. No one seemed to know where he'd disappeared to, or if they did, they weren't talking. I tried, reaching out to some of the people on the list who hadn't been marked with an X, hoping they might have answers, but most either ignored my calls or claimed they didn't recognize the names I mentioned. The only person who responded was Lucas's older sister, whose voice cracked when I told her what I'd done. "He hasn't come home," she whispered, choking back tears. "Whatever you're involved in, just be careful." Her words haunted me long after we hung up. If giving Lucas that cone had put him in harm's way, then I was responsible, and I didn't know how to fix it. In the end, I quit the job and left town, hoping distance would dull the fear gnawing at my chest. But even now, years later, I can't escape the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I hear the jingle of an ice cream truck or see a faded vehicle parked too long in one spot, my heart skips a beat. Whatever Ray and his truck were part of, it wasn't something ordinary. It was something otherworldly, almost ritualistic. And though I'll never fully understand why those people were targeted or what happened to them, I know one thing for certain. Some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered. Still, late at night, I wonder about the ones with the red X's, whether they're still out there somewhere living lives they weren't supposed to live. Or worse, whether they've become part of whatever system Ray served. Either way, I'll carry the weight of what I uncovered forever, because sometimes the sweetest treats come with the bitterest truths. I'll never forget the summer I met Paul, the ice cream truck driver, who always seemed to know exactly what I wanted before I even said it. He'd pull up outside our cul-de-sac every afternoon, his truck chiming that familiar jingle that made my heart race with excitement. "Hey there, champ," he'd call out, leaning out the window with a grin that felt like it was just for me. Somehow, he always remembered my name, even though I'm pretty sure I only told him once. And he had this way of making me feel special, like I wasn't just another kid buying a popsicle. At first it was nice, almost magical. But looking back now, I realize how strange it really was, how much effort he put into being friendly, how often he showed up at the same spot, and how he always seemed to know when I'd be outside. Back then, though, I didn't think twice about it. To me, Paul was just the coolest guy in the world. That all changed one night in late August, a night I'll never forget no matter how hard I try. My parents had gone out to dinner, leaving me home alone for a couple of hours. I was sprawled on the couch watching TV when I heard it, the faint sound of an ice cream truck's melody drifting through the open windows. At first I thought I was imagining things. It was nearly 9 p.m., way past the usual time for ice cream trucks to be out. But then I heard a knock at the door, soft but deliberate. When I peeked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. It was Paul, standing there in his uniform, holding a tray of desserts like some twisted version of a neighborhood hero. "Hey, Birdie?" he said cheerfully, as if it were perfectly normal for him to show up uninvited at night. "I've got a surprise for you, free dessert just for you." His voice sent chills down my spine, and suddenly, all those warm feelings I'd had toward him turned icy cold. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My parents had always told me not to answer the door for strangers, but this wasn't exactly a stranger. It was Paul, the guy who'd been driving his ice cream truck past our house every day for months. Still, something about the situation felt wrong. The late hour, the way he lingered on our porch like he expected me to come outside, it all screamed danger, even though I couldn't explain why. "Sorry, I'm not supposed to open the door," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. Paul chuckled softly like he was humoring me. "No worries, champ," he said, his tone still friendly but with an edge that made my skin crawl. "Tell you what, why don't you step outside just for a second? I've got your favorite popsicle right here." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. How did he know my favorite? And why did he keep calling me champ like we were best friends or something? My mind raced as I backed away from the door, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. That's when I noticed the kitchen window. It was wide open, just a few feet from where I stood. If I could get out without him seeing me, I might be able to run to one of the neighbors' houses for help. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and quietly climbed onto the counter, praying the floorboards wouldn't creak under my weight. As I slipped through the window, landing awkwardly on the grass below, I heard Paul's voice again, louder this time. "Come on, buddy, don't be shy." He sounded closer now, like he'd moved around the side of the house toward the backyard. Panic surged through me as I bolted across the lawn, barefoot and breathless, until I reached Mrs. Alvarez's front door 3 houses down. She answered almost immediately, her eyes widening when she saw me standing there in tears. By the time my parents got home, and the police arrived, Paul was long gone, leaving behind nothing but tire tracks and a tray of untouched desserts on our porch. The police took my statement that night, but I could tell they weren't entirely convinced. "Are you sure it was the ice cream man?" one officer asked, jotting notes in his pad while glancing skeptically at me. "Did he say anything threatening? Try to force his way in?" I shook my head, frustration bubbling up inside. Me, because I knew how it sounded. A kid scared of a guy who'd always been nice before. But it wasn't normal for an ice cream truck to show up after dark, and it definitely wasn't normal for Paul to knock on someone's door uninvited. Still, without more evidence, there wasn't much they could do beyond file a report and promise to keep an eye out. My parents were furious. Not at me, but at themselves for leaving me alone, even if it had only been for a few hours. They hugged me tightly, over and over, like they were afraid I might disappear if they let go. That night, I slept in their room, clutching a flashlight under the covers just in case Paul came back. A few days later, the police returned with news that made my blood run cold. Paul, or at least someone matching his description, had been investigated in other neighborhoods for suspicious behavior around children. Nothing had stuck, apparently. He'd always managed to slip away before anyone could gather enough proof. One detective showed us a grainy photo taken from a security camera in another town. It was definitely him. Same uniform, same truck, same unsettling grin plastered across his face. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Paul hadn't chosen me randomly. He'd been watching me, studying my routines, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. And if I hadn't trusted my instincts that night, if I'd opened the door instead of climbing out the window, I didn't want to think about what might have happened. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that Paul was still out there somewhere, lurking just beyond sight. My parents tried to reassure me, installing new locks on all the doors and setting up a motion-activated light in the backyard. But no matter how many precautions we took, the fear lingered like a shadow I couldn't escape. Every time I heard the faint jingle of an ice cream truck, my chest tightened, and I found myself peeking through the blinds to make sure it wasn't him. The worst part was knowing he'd gotten so close enough to knock on my door and try to coax me outside. It made me question everything. Had he been planning this for weeks, months? How many other kids had he approached before me, testing how far he could go without getting caught? The thought kept me awake at night, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with him. The cheerful waves, the way he always knew my name, the endless supply of free desserts he'd handed out during special occasions. What had seemed harmless then now felt sinister, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place too late. As the weeks went by, life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, or at least as close to it as I could manage. The police never found Paul, and eventually people stopped talking about him altogether. But for me, the memory refused to fade. Even now, years later, I can't hear the sound of an ice cream truck without feeling a chill crawl up my spine. Some might call it paranoia, but I know better. I know what it feels like to look someone in the eye and realize they're not who you thought they were. Paul taught me that lesson the hard way, and I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. Because even though he's gone, his grin still haunts my dreams, and every jingle reminds me how close I came to becoming one of his victims. What sticks with me most isn't just the fear. It's the way Paul manipulated trust, turning something as innocent as an ice cream truck into a tool for something darker. He didn't start by showing up at my door late at night. He started by being friendly, by remembering my name and giving out free treats. It was all calculated, designed to make me let my guard down until I didn't even question his presence anymore. That realization changed the way I see people now. I used to think kindness was simple, straightforward, something you could take at face value. But after Paul, I learned that sometimes the nicest faces hide the scariest intentions. Now, whenever someone goes out of their way to be overly friendly or seems to know too much about me without reason, I can't help but wonder what they really want. It's exhausting living like that, but it's better than being caught off guard again. Even now, when I walk past an ice cream truck, I feel a mix of emotions: nostalgia for the carefree days before I knew better, anger at Paul for stealing, that innocence and gratitude for escaping when I did. My parents still joke about how I won't touch anything from an ice cream truck, no matter how tempting it looks. They don't understand. It's not just about the desserts. It's about the man behind the counter, the one who smiled so brightly while hiding something far darker beneath the surface. Somewhere out there, Paul might still be driving his truck, charming other kids with promises of free popsicles and harmless fun. Or maybe he's moved on to someplace new, leaving behind more stories like mine. Either way, I'll never forget the sound of his voice calling me champ, or the sight of those tire tracks fading into the distance the night I barely escaped. And I'll never stop wondering, if I hadn't climbed out that window, would anyone have believed me? I never thought I'd hear an ice cream truck in the middle of nowhere, but there it was, faint and distant, drifting through the trees like some kind of ghostly echo. I was at my family's cabin, a secluded little spot deep in the woods where cell service barely worked and neighbors were miles away. It was supposed to be peaceful, a weekend escape from the chaos of city life, but that jingle changed everything. At first, I thought I was imagining it, maybe dreaming or hearing things, because of how quiet the forest was. But then it came again, louder this time, unmistakably real. My heart sank as I realized what it meant. Someone or something was out here with me. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it. A rusted, beat-up van parked just beyond the edge of our property, its headlights off but engine idling softly. The sight of it made my skin crawl. It wasn't like anything you'd expect to see out here in the wilderness. It looked wrong, out of place, almost predatory. The license plate was missing, and one of the back doors hung slightly ajar, revealing shadows inside that shifted ever so slightly when the wind blew. I wanted to believe it was just some lost traveler, or maybe even kids messing around, but deep down I knew better. Something about the way it sat there, silent and looming, felt deliberate, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. I didn't stick around long enough to find out more. Instead, I bolted back inside, locking every door and window I could reach. For hours, I sat by the fireplace, clutching a kitchen knife, listening for any sound outside. When nothing happened, I tried convincing myself it was all in my head. But then, late that night, I got the first text message, and everything got worse. The message was simple, just 3 words: I see you. It appeared on my phone without a sender name or number, and for a moment, I thought it might be some kind of glitch. But as I stared at the screen, my stomach churned. There was no way anyone could have sent me a text out here, not with no signal bars showing, and yet somehow they had. The timing was too perfect to ignore. I turned off my phone immediately, but the damage was done. Those 3 little words replayed in my mind over and over, taunting me. Who was watching me? And how did they know I was here? My breathing quickened as I double-checked all the locks again, even though I'd already gone through them twice. Then, just as I was starting to calm down, or at least try to, I heard it. A loud knock at the front door. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and demanding. My blood ran cold. Whoever it was, they weren't leaving. Another knock came, louder this time, followed by a voice calling out, "You shouldn't be here alone." I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed the flashlight and crouched low, peering through the crack between the curtains without making a sound. Outside, silhouetted against the moonlight, stood a figure wearing a hoodie pulled tight around their face. They shifted from foot to foot, glancing toward the trees before knocking again. This time they added, "Open up, we need to talk." Their tone wasn't angry exactly, but there was something unsettling about it, like they were trying to. Hard to sound casual. My hands trembled as I debated what to do. Calling the police seemed useless. They'd never get here fast enough, and besides, I doubted they'd take my story seriously. What would I even say? That a creepy van showed up outside my cabin, someone broke into my shed, and now I was getting anonymous texts telling me I shouldn't be here. It sounded insane, even to me. Still, I knew I couldn't stay trapped inside forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to make a move and hope it didn't cost me my life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the figure outside gave up knocking and wandered back toward the van. I watched through the window as they climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door with enough force to make me flinch. But instead of driving away, the engine just idled there, rumbling softly in the darkness. It was like they were waiting for something, or someone. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Had they broken into my shed earlier to look for tools or supplies, or was it just to send a message to remind me that they could get closer than I thought? Whatever the reason, their presence made one thing clear. They weren't here by accident. This wasn't some random passerby who'd stumbled onto our property. They'd come for me, or at least because of me, and now they were testing how far they could go before I cracked. That's when I noticed the shed door wide open, its lock hanging loose and useless. Panic surged through me as I realized what this meant. Not only had they been watching me, but they'd also been inside my space, touching my things, leaving their mark. The thought made me physically ill. I wanted to call the police right then, consequences be damned, but every time I picked up my phone, I hesitated. What if they were still out there watching me? What if calling attention to myself only made things worse? Instead, I grabbed a blanket and curled up on the couch, clutching the flashlight like it was my last line of defense. Every creak of the old cabin walls, every rustle of leaves outside sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. By morning, I was exhausted, but alive. When daylight finally broke, I ventured outside cautiously, half expecting to find the van still parked where it had been. But it was gone, leaving behind nothing but tire tracks and a lingering sense of dread. The van's disappearance didn't bring me any relief. In fact, it made everything worse. If it had stayed, at least I could have pointed to it as proof that something was wrong. But now, with no evidence except a few tire marks and my own shaken nerves, I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Had any of it even happened? Was I overreacting to some harmless traveler who'd stopped near my property by coincidence? I tried telling myself that maybe I had imagined the whole thing, the jingle, the texts, the knock on the door. But deep down, I knew better. The shed lock was broken, its door left ajar in a way that screamed intrusion. And then there were the footprints. Muddy boot prints leading from the tree line straight to the cabin and back again. Someone had been here and they hadn't come peacefully. When the police finally arrived after I managed to drive far enough down the mountain to get cell service, they didn't have much to go on. Probably kids messing around, one officer suggested, glancing skeptically at the tire tracks, or hunters looking for a place to park. His dismissive tone infuriated me, but arguing wouldn't change anything. Without witnesses or solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do beyond filing a report and promising to patrol the area more often. As they drove away, I stood on the porch staring into the woods, feeling more alone than ever. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave right then, to put as much distance between me and this place as possible. But another part of me refused to let whoever it was scare me off. Still, every time I stepped outside after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me watching, waiting for their next move. Whoever had been driving that van wasn't done. Not yet. For days afterward, I couldn't relax. Every sound outside, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, sent my heart racing. I started sleeping with a chair wedged under the doorknob and kept the flashlight by my side at all times. During the day, I tried to distract myself by cleaning up the cabin or reading, but my mind kept drifting back to that van and the figure in the hoodie. Who were they? What did they want from me? The questions looped endlessly in my head, keeping me awake long after the sun went down. Even worse was the paranoia. It clung to me like a second skin, making me question every shadow, every unfamiliar noise. One afternoon, while checking the shed again, I found something that made my blood run cold. A note taped to the inside of the door. Written in block letters were the words, "You're not safe here." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. I already knew who it was from. By the end of the week, I'd convinced myself to leave. Whatever bravado I'd felt about staying had evaporated the moment I saw that note. Packing my car felt like an act of survival, each item tossed into the trunk a step closer to safety. As I drove away from the cabin, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, half expecting to see the van idling behind me. But the road was empty, silent except for the hum of my tires on gravel. Still, the fear stayed with me, lingering in the pit of my stomach like a weight I couldn't shake. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened the door that night, or stepped outside when the van first appeared. Would I have ended up another statistic, someone whose story gets whispered about in hushed tones? Or was this all just some twisted game meant to scare me off? I'll never know for sure. All I do know is that I haven't been back to the cabin since, and I doubt I ever will. I never thought accepting a free ice cream would lead me here, but desperation has a way of clouding judgment. It all started on a sweltering summer afternoon when I was sitting on my porch, staring at the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table. That's when I heard it, the cheerful jingle of an ice cream truck rounding the corner, except this wasn't the usual bright, colorful truck you'd expect. This one was older, with faded paint and a slightly off-tune melody that made it feel unsettling. The driver, a man in his 50s with a wide-brimmed hat and a too-friendly smile, parked right in front of my house. "Rough day?" he asked, leaning out the window. Before I could answer, he handed me a free cone. "No charge," he said, waving off my protests. "But if you ever need a little extra help, I might have some ideas." At the time, it felt harmless, a kind gesture from a stranger who seemed to understand what I was going through. Little did I know that simple act of kindness would spiral into something far darker. The ideas he mentioned soon turned into small favors. First, it was letting him park in my driveway for a few hours while he restocked. Then he asked if I could hold onto a package for him until his next route. Each request seemed innocent enough, and in exchange he'd slip me a few free treats or even some cash, enough to cover groceries for the week. For a while I convinced myself it was just good fortune, a lucky break during a tough time. But as the weeks went by, the favors grew stranger. He started asking me to store more packages, sometimes heavy ones that clinked when I moved them. Then came the requests to let strangers use my backyard as a shortcut or hang around late at night. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but by then I was in too deep. My financial struggles had blinded me to the warning signs, and now I was neck deep in whatever scheme this man was running. It wasn't until I overheard a conversation between two of the strangers lingering near my backyard that I realized the full extent of what was happening. They weren't just random passers-by, they were part of something bigger, something illegal. One of them mentioned deliveries, while the other talked about avoiding certain streets because of police patrols. My stomach churned as pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. The packages I'd been storing, the late-night visitors, the way the driver always seemed to know exactly when and where to show up. This wasn't just some quirky ice cream truck operation. It was a front for something far more sinister. The thought made me sick to my stomach, but I didn't know how to get out. Every time I tried to say no, the driver would smile that same disarming smile and remind me how much he'd helped me so far. "You wouldn't want to ruin such a good thing, would you?" he'd say, his tone light, but laced with an unspoken threat. I finally decided I had to put a stop to it. After another package arrived, one heavier than usual and wrapped in thick black plastic, I called the police. When they showed up, I led them to my backyard, ready to explain everything. But when I pointed to the spot where the truck usually parked, there was nothing there. No truck, no jingle, no sign anyone had ever been around. The officers exchanged confused looks, one of them even asking if I was sure I hadn't imagined it. Their skepticism only deepened when I showed them the package. It was gone too, as if it had never existed. I felt like I was losing my mind, but then I noticed something chilling. Across the street, a group of kids were staring at my house, their eyes wide with recognition. One of them whispered to another, pointing toward the empty driveway. "There's the ice cream truck," she said softly, her voice trembling. That's when it hit me. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal. And somehow, the children could still see what the adults couldn't. The realization that only kids could see or hear the ice cream truck sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just paranoia or stress, it was something else, something I couldn't explain. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to how the neighborhood children reacted whenever the faint sound of the jingle drifted through the air. They'd stop whatever they were doing, their faces lighting up with excitement before quickly shifting to unease. Some would glance nervously at their parents, tugging on their sleeves and pointing toward empty streets where no one else saw anything. Others whispered among themselves, sharing stories about the strange man who gave out free treats but always asked for something in return. One boy told me he'd been offered an entire box of ice cream bars if he promised to watch the truck while the driver ran an errand. He refused, but his friends teased him for being scared, saying it was just a silly game. The more I heard, the more convinced I became that this wasn't just some criminal operation. It was preying on innocence itself. Desperate for answers, I decided to confront the driver directly. When the truck appeared again late one evening, I marched outside, heart pounding, ready to demand the truth. But as I approached, the driver's expression changed from his usual friendly grin to something colder, sharper. "You shouldn't have looked so closely," he said, his voice low and measured. Before I could respond, he handed me another package, this one heavier than any I'd held before. "Take it," he urged, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Or maybe you'd rather explain to those kids why you let them down." His words hit like a punch to the gut. I glanced back at the street where a group of children stood watching silently, their eyes wide and accusing. For the first time I understood. This wasn't just about me anymore. Whatever the driver was doing, it had spread its roots deep into the fabric of our community. And pulling them out might come at a cost none of us were prepared to pay. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow outside felt like it was watching me. The package sat on my kitchen counter, heavy and ominous as if it were mocking me. I wanted to open it to see what secrets it held, but fear kept me frozen. Instead, I spent hours searching online for anything related to mysterious ice cream, trucks or similar stories. What I found chilled me to the bone. Forum posts from other neighborhoods describing identical scenarios. Free treats in exchange for small favors that escalated into something darker. Some claimed the drivers vanished without a trace when confronted. Others warned about how quickly things spiraled out of control. One commenter even mentioned the connection to children, saying these trucks seemed to target families with kids, using them as both customers and unwitting accomplices. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep the package any longer. It was poison, both literally and figuratively. But getting rid of it wouldn't be easy, not with the driver's unspoken threats lingering in my mind. The next day, I tried again, to report everything to the police, this time bringing along some of the online evidence I'd gathered. They listened politely but remained skeptical, especially when I mentioned the children seeing the truck. "It's probably just their imagination," one officer suggested, though his tone implied he thought I might be imagining things too. Frustrated and running out of options, I decided to take matters into my own hands. That evening, under the cover of darkness, I drove the package far away from my neighborhood, leaving it hidden deep in the woods where no one would find it. When I returned home, I felt a fleeting. Over the next few days, the truck became a constant presence in my life, though no one else seemed to notice it anymore. The children still saw it, of course. They'd wave excitedly or run toward it whenever it appeared, but their parents dismissed their cries as make-believe. I couldn't shake the feeling that the driver was taunting me, proving that he could slip through the cracks of reality while I was left exposed, vulnerable. He didn't need to speak to remind me of his power. Every time the jingle rang out, it felt like a countdown ticking closer to something I wasn't sure I could stop. One afternoon, I found a note tucked under my doormat. "You can't run forever." It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. My hands trembled as I crumpled the paper and threw it away, but deep down I knew he was right. No matter how far I drove or how many times I tried to disappear, the truck always found its way back to me. In the end, I had no choice but to leave, not just my home, but the entire neighborhood. I packed up everything I owned and moved across the country, hoping distance would break whatever hold the truck had on my life. For a while it worked. I stopped hearing the jingle, stopped seeing glimpses of faded paint out of the corner of my eye. But even now, years later, I can't help but tense up whenever I hear the sound of an ice cream truck passing by. Because somewhere out there I know it's still operating, still preying on unsuspecting families and using kids as its unwitting accomplices. And sometimes late at night, I wonder if the driver ever thinks about me, if he remembers the woman who tried to fight back and failed. All I know for certain is this: some things are better left unseen, and some favors come with strings attached that can never truly be cut. Every summer afternoon, like clockwork, the ice cream truck would park just outside our apartment complex. The jingle was faint at first, growing louder as it rolled down the street, and I'd race out with whatever loose change I could scrounge from between couch cushions or beg off my mum. Popsicles were my thing, bright red ones that stained my tongue and dripped sticky trails down my fingers. The driver, a guy who called himself Tony, always greeted me with a grin. "The usual?" he'd ask, even though we both knew exactly what I wanted. He had this calm way about him, like nothing in the world bothered him. At the time, I thought it made him nice, but now I wonder if it was something else entirely. For months, everything seemed normal, or as normal as things could be when you're 9 years old and obsessed with frozen treats. But then, things started to feel off. It wasn't sudden, not at first. I'd come home from playing outside and collapse onto the couch, too tired to finish my homework or even watch TV. My mum chalked it up to late nights or skipping lunch, but I didn't think so. Then came the nausea, this weird queasy feeling that hit me out of nowhere. One day, after eating a popsicle Tony had handed me, I felt so dizzy I almost fell over trying to walk back inside. That's when my mom really started paying attention. She stopped letting me go to the truck alone and started hovering whenever I ate anything from it. "You've been acting strange," she said one evening, watching me push food around my plate. When I told her how exhausted I'd been feeling, her face went pale. The next morning, while I was at school, she bought a home testing kit online and tested the wrapper from one of my popsicles. What she found left both of us shaken. When I got home from school that day, my mom was sitting at the kitchen table with a look I'd never seen before, part fear, part anger, and something else I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight. She showed me the results of the test, traces of some kind of sedative. Not enough to knock me out completely, but enough to make me feel constantly drained and sick. My stomach churned as I stared at the little strip with its bright red line, confirming what she'd suspected. How could this have happened? Tony, the same guy who always smiled and joked with me, had been lacing his popsicles with something meant to drug kids? It didn't make sense. Why would he do that? What scared me most was how long it had gone unnoticed. If my mom hadn't tested the wrapper, would I have kept eating them until something worse happened? I felt violated in a way I couldn't fully explain, like someone had crossed a line they weren't supposed to even know about. The next afternoon, when Tony's truck pulled up outside, my mom marched straight out to confront him. I stayed behind, peeking through the curtains as she approached him, holding the crumpled wrapper like it was evidence in court. At first, Tony just stood there, leaning casually against his truck like nothing was wrong. But when she showed him the test results, his smile faltered. For a split second, I saw something darker flash across his face, something cold and calculating. But then it was gone, replaced by an awkward laugh. "It's just to help kids relax," he muttered, almost too quietly for us to hear. Before my mom could say anything else, he hopped into his truck and sped off, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of sugar and exhaust. We called the police right away, but by the time they arrived, Tony and his truck were nowhere to be found. The police didn't seem particularly concerned, at least not at first. They took down our statements and promised to look into it, but I could tell they weren't taking us seriously. "Are you sure about this?" one officer asked, glancing skeptically at the home test kit results. "These aren't exactly foolproof." My mom tried to argue, explaining how careful she'd been, but they just nodded politely and moved on. By the time they left, I could see the frustration simmering in her eyes. She spent the rest of the day calling anyone who might listen, local news stations, other parents, even the health department, but no one seemed to care. Meanwhile, all I could think about was Tony's parting words. "It's just to help kids relax." What did that even mean? Was he trying to justify what he'd done, or was there something more sinister behind it? The phrase looped endlessly in my head, making me feel sick all over again. That night, while I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something else that made my skin crawl. Tony had known exactly which popsicles I liked best. Every single time, without fail, he handed me the same bright red ones without asking. How many other kids had he done this to? And why had he targeted me or us? It felt personal now, like he'd singled me out for reasons I couldn't understand. My mom must have been thinking the same thing, because she came into my room later, sitting on the edge of my bed with a worried expression. "We'll figure this out," she whispered, brushing hair out of my face. But her voice wavered, betraying the fear she was trying so hard to hide. For the first time in my life, I felt unsafe in my own neighborhood, and the thought terrified. The days that followed were a blur of unanswered questions and mounting paranoia. My mom became obsessed with finding Tony, or at least uncovering who he really was. She scoured social media, local forums, anything that might give us a lead. But it was like he'd vanished into thin air. No one in the apartment complex seemed to know much about him either. They only remembered the ice cream truck as a harmless summer fixture. "He's probably just some guy trying to make a living," one neighbor said when we asked. The comment infuriated me, not because I thought they were wrong, but because they didn't understand how wrong they were. Tony wasn't harmless. He wasn't just some guy. And yet, without proof beyond a home test kit and a cryptic sentence, there was nothing we could do to convince anyone else. The lack of answers gnawed at me, leaving me restless and constantly on edge. What haunted me most was the realization that Tony had been closer to my life than I'd ever realized. How many afternoons had I spent sitting on the curb, happily eating his popsicles while he watched me? Had he been studying me, testing how much he could get away with? Or was I just another kid on his route, chosen for no reason other than convenience? The uncertainty made it worse. Knowing that someone had invaded my world so quietly, so methodically, and left behind scars I couldn't see. Even now, weeks later, I couldn't shake the image of his face. The way his smile had always seemed friendly until the moment it didn't. Every time I heard the faint jingle of an ice cream truck in the distance, my chest tightened. And I found myself scanning the street for any sign of him. I knew deep down he wouldn't come back here, not after getting caught, but that didn't stop the fear from creeping in whenever I least expected it. Months passed, and life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, or at least as close to it as I could manage. The ice cream truck never came back, and eventually people stopped talking about Tony altogether. But for me, the memory lingered like a shadow I couldn't escape. Every popsicle wrapper, every cheerful jingle in the distance, it all reminded me of what had happened. My mom tried her best to help me move on, but she couldn't erase the lingering unease that settled over our home. It wasn't just fear of Tony anymore. It was the realization that people like him existed in the world, hiding behind smiles and routines, blending into our lives until they crossed a line we didn't even know was there. That thought stayed with me, shaping how I saw strangers and questioned intentions in ways I never had before. To this day, I haven't touched another popsicle, not one since that summer when everything changed. Some might call it paranoia, but for me it's a reminder. Trust isn't something you give freely, not without knowing exactly who deserves it. Sometimes late at night, I'll replay those moments in my head. The way Tony handed me my favorite treat, the casual way he said, "helping kids relax." Was he trying to justify his actions, or was it something darker, a glimpse into a mindset I'll never fully understand? Either way, I know I'll never forget him. Not completely. Because even now, when I hear the faint echo of an ice cream truck rolling down the street, part of me wonders if he's still out there, waiting for his next unsuspecting customer.